Okay, just about an hour or so ago, Blizzard dropped some pretty substantial nerfs to tanks in terms of their defenses and, more importantly, their self-healing in the War Within beta. And the response to it has been poor. I have been a little annoyed. A lot of people are very annoyed. And so I kind of made a pledge to myself that I would take a minute to chill out. And I did that by writing up my notes, which you can see here. And so, I think what I want to do here is I want to kind of think about how this will impact the state of tanks, just actually read through the blue post, understand what their philosophy was with these changes and respond to them accordingly. And then once we've done that, try and make some sort of analysis, see what tanks will be kind of coming out of this more and less unscathed, and then wrap up by, as I have written in my notes, literally say something nice. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into the blue post now, and here it is. With the introduction of the Dragonflight talent system and season-over-season changes, tanks in World of Warcraft have become extremely durable relative to non-tank characters. That is true. Their active defenses can mitigate high percentages of incoming damage, and they have strong self-healing. Agreed, it has been really great and fun. Today, in the hardest content in the game, many tanks can sustain themselves without much assistance from healers. In some cases, we've seen it become optimal to do group content without a healer at all. True, horrible issue, pretty much facilitated entirely by the fact that prop pallies could heal groups easily, and they chose the worst possible fix to it, which was to append a massive mana cost on a Word of Glory instead of just making it so that prop pallies couldn't solo heal groups. World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer online, and its multiplayer aspects are a major strength. Group content is extremely rewarding when players performing different roles come together to overcome a challenge. We want to reinforce the importance of the healer role and work toward gameplay where tanks and healers collaborate to reduce the damage the tank is taking and to restore the tank's lost health. Tank durability can cause some other problems as well, especially in challenging in-game content that we want to work toward improving. Enemy damage is increased to challenge tanks, but if it's increased too much, it gets spiky and puts tanks in significant danger if their defenses ever drop. This can lead to tanks getting killed rapidly, seemingly out of nowhere. We feel this is unsatisfying and would prefer tank damage to generally be evenly distributed, but still threatening over time. This just sort of sounds like tank damage instead of being spikes up and down. I'll even pull up paint. Let's do it. Basically what they're saying is instead of, spike, 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 they want tank damage to be, oh, we have brush tips. I love paint. And they want it to be this. This? Boring. Boring. Not that this is like fun up top. I don't think so. Not the most fun up here either, but this flatline, very boring. It feels like vanilla WoW, being auto-attacked a bunch, and that's the damage. No, thank you. If tanks are not threatened enough, then the most challenging part of in-game content can become keeping DPS and healers alive, often against high burst damage. Making tank survival a more involving element of group gameplay could give us some freedom to ease up on the threat to other group members. I don't know about that one. To address the above, we're making reductions to tank durability and self-healing. This will allow us to smooth out the damage tanks and parties take while retaining the challenge of keeping them alive over time. We'll take those changes into account in encounter tuning as well. Bottom line, tanks will take more damage overall, but shouldn't die significantly more often. To increase the overall damage tanks take and their reliance on healers, we're primarily increasing the percentage of damage they take after mitigation from steady damage sources like physical attacks. We're making fewer reductions to each class's defenses against burst damage or threats that are currently most likely to be lethal to them. Encounters will be tuned with this in mind, so the character of tank damage changes, but the lethality of it doesn't significantly increase. Okay, that's fine, right? If they pull this off, if they succeed, and tanks die within a margin of error the same amount of times within a margin of error, fine, whatever. That sounds great. I just have trouble believing that the goal here would be achieved by the changes that have been discussed. Tank damage intake should be steady and not too fast. Sure, that sounds great. One of our goals for these changes is to smooth out the rate tanks take damage to reduce surprise spiky deaths. I think the possibility of being spiked suddenly is valuable, but I think maybe this is me playing a lot of Elden Ring recently, but I do think you want it to be stuff that is predictable or avoidable or in some way capable of being offset rather than just an auto attack hit you for half your health pool and then another one hit you for half your health pool and now you're a dead man. I would like it to be things that I can go, oh, I messed that up, that's why I'm dead. Healers should have time to respond to tank health, and tanks should have time to use self-heals like Word of Glory or Celestial Brew. Well, I can think of another way to give tanks time to use self-heals like Word of Glory and Celestial Brew specifically, and that would be to take them off the global cooldown. Anyways, for some classes, we're increasing their passive defenses to compensate for decreases to more active or reactive defensive mechanics. Tank busters will still create challenging moments that reward tanks for planning and smart use of cooldowns. Tanks will have strong answers to threats or period of danger, but less sustained self-healing. Tanks should have autonomy over their own survival and will still have cooldowns or emergency self-heals like Renewal and Impending Victory, but the healing of continuous effects like Ellune's Favored or Indomitable are reduced, so tanks must have more of a partnership with healers to restore their missing health once it's lost. TLDR, healers are gonna have to bomb heals into tanks again. Healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing. This feels like all of the tanks are being punished because of blood decay being too good for too long. Healers play a critical role, and keeping tanks alive is part of what they bring to the table. However, healers contribute to the success of groups in many ways, especially in dungeons. They sustain the group, dispel harmful effects, respond to burst damage. They also do damage, which isn't listed in here at all, but healers do damage. Tank healing should not demand so much that it interferes with their other roles. It may take some iteration to get the balance right on this, where healers feel essential to tank survival, but with their attention not overly demanded by it. Tank gameplay should not significantly change or require actions like kiting to survive. This is probably the biggest thing that people on Twitter, friends in various discords are kind of banging the gong on here. The idea that it will not require kiting to survive. We're happy that more players are enjoying playing tanks with their friends and in pickup groups. If that is true, that is good. There are a lot of demands on tanks, such as learning Mythic Plus routes, leading groups, and knowing what trash abilities are particularly dangerous. Yes, this is why the general sentiment when it comes to tank nerfs is that they're pretty much always bad. Buffing tanks is like always good. It's always harder to find tanks than anything else, and people are generally much more happy when tanks are strong. Not necessarily so strong that you don't need to run a healer, or that you would run 5 tanks instead of any DPS, but people are much happier with the state of the game when tanks are stronger, because tanks have to be the leader of your Mythic Plus route. Tanks are often even in situations where I am not a leader of a guild, whatever, I am still shot calling in raids at opportune junctures because you are in the optimal position to do so. This is just a part of being a high-level tank. You are a leader. You have to be in charge of the group. That is so much more responsibility than is put on people who, having healed in the past, don't even need to know really what the mechanics are. It is a lot more responsibility, and so it's better when the class that you're playing is strong and doesn't feel like they're fighting for their life every second in order to stay alive, and they have a little bit more control over their own second-to-second survival. The gameplay of standing toe-to-toe with groups of enemies and the tactics you've learned to survive should continue to be effective. Your feedback, please. All right, this is probably the most problematic section of this first blue post here. We're excited for you to get a hold of these changes and share your feedback on playing with them because there are so many factors to tanking. The most valuable feedback will be descriptions of your experiences playing with them. What does it feel like to play with these changes, and what's different for you and your allies? Here are some questions to give you ideas of things you could share. How durable do you feel before and after? What makes you feel that difference? In what ways does it change how you play? How did it change your builds? And what scenarios are you getting into trouble? For healers, how much more do you have to heal the tank? We'd also love it if you can share what content you played and its difficulty level. Heroic versus Mythic raid. I'm going to jump ahead here in my notes a bit and say, raid testing is over. Raid testing is over, so clearly they're not looking for us to test this in the beta. They are looking for us to test this in the game. So I wouldn't expect any sort of changes to be made in the next couple of days just due to the massive wall of negative feedback. I would expect this to be something that stays as is for a while, and then it will be iterated upon maybe in the second season of the next expansion, which is concerning. To be a bit more optimistic, maybe it's something that they'll get to early on in the first season, or maybe at the midpoint, the 0.5 patch or whatever. But obviously that's a pretty big concern. We've kind of been down this same road before with nerfing tanks right at the end of the beta with Shadowlands, and Shadowlands Season 1 was one of the most hated and unsuccessful seasons of Mythic Plus ever. There are a lot of great changes to Mythic Plus happening in the coming expansion, a lot of stuff that people are happy about. It would be pretty cool if tanks were something that people were happy playing at that same time. All right, now let's look at the class changes specifically that are happening. In the War Within, all character staminas have been increased by 60% as part of an overall adjustment to the pace of healing gameplay. This increases the relative value of abilities that heal a percentage of a character's maximum health. It was pretty huge for a few classes in particular. Blood DK got a big bump out of that for their minimum healing, and it's just generally pretty good when stuff scales proportional to health. Bear Druid in particular just got a great big buff to their healing. A few of the little ticky-tack warrior heals that are based off of your percentage of health were bumped up as well. And Brewmaster Monk, because their healing is based off of taking a percentage of your damage, actually got a very significant healing nerf. And it was really something you could feel with this change that, has been the one thing about Brewmaster Monk that has not felt great. All right, let's start with Blood DK. Death Strike is a powerful ability that allows Blood Death Knights to mitigate a percentage of any form of damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Death Strike. We all know it. We all love it. Unless we don't play DK and then we wish we had it. In a way, Death Strike works like a retroactive shield block. That is not the way that I would describe it, but sure. Instead of reducing damage up front, it mitigates the damage you took by healing you. If used in succession, Death Strike can affect a single hit multiple times, which would be comparable to blocking a hit multiple times and then restoring yourself to higher health than when you started. Right, that has kind of been the way that Death Knight has been playing, using Death Strike since it was converted over to be a runic power spender instead of a rune spender. This is like 10 years now, and that's kind of the point. You bank up runic power, and then you get to a point where you take a big spike of damage, you tap, your Death Strike, and then now you're back to a lot of health. So this is being removed. They are making it so that you're only able to heal the Death Knight from a given damage event once to make it scale like other tank mitigation mechanics. The problem with doing this is that it isn't like other tank mitigation mechanics, it is a heal. We are also reducing runic power generation somewhat and reducing some of the mitigation Death Knights get from high uptime cooldowns like Enfeeble and Dancing Rune Weapon, but increasing armor from Bone Shield. Overall, Death Knights should take damage more smoothly, and they remain one of the strongest tanks for encounters with high magic or periodic damage. This is still an advantage that DKs have, the fact that they are able to heal through magic and periodic damage, but the problem is that since they're only able to heal off of each damage event one time now, I really think a lot of that value is kind of thrown away. So obviously this first change here is that you can only heal once per damage event, which means pretty much as a Death Knight, you're gonna kind of on like metronomic precision, you're gonna want to Death Strike every 5 seconds. And that means that that's gonna be the cap on your healing. It's just healing every 5 seconds. It really takes a lot of the complexity, a lot of the art of playing a Blood DK away. There's not really gonna be any more room for pooling. It's all gonna be about it's been 5 seconds, Death Strike, 5 seconds, Death Strike. You could literally set up a metronome on your desk if you wanted to be that big of a nerd, because that is the way that you're gonna play Blood DK. Now, this does fix one of the biggest problems I've had with Blood DK since all the way back in Wrath of the Lich King when they were first added. I guess more Kata when Blood really became the tank archetype. But a new aura, Coagulating Blood, shows the amount of recently taken damage that will be used to calculate the value of your next Death Strike. So you're not reliant on add-ons, you're not reliant on some sort of hidden value for the value of your next Death Strike. It will specifically just be listed as a buff, and then it is a flat amount, and also a number of stacks that is based on a percentage of your current health. So this is actually pretty good. This is like good technology that I'm glad to have them bring in. I hate this. I think that this is a terrible change that they are making to Blood DK up top here. The change to Death Strike is brutal. But I think the Coagulating Blood aura is like really good. I think it's great for using add-ons to track stuff. I think it's great just for giving more player information. All good. Blood Shield's cap is now 50% of the Death Knight's maximum health instead of 100, and it's no longer temporarily increased by Vamp Blood. This was fine. This isn't going to change anything when you're actively tanking, only like reduce the amount of healing that you're able to bank up before a taunt swap. This is a total non-change. It's fine. Rune of the Fallen Crusader, this has already been in, has just been reduced slightly to compensate for the increase to max health. That's fine. Runic Continuation now generates 3 runic power instead of 5. This is like random RP that you can generate just by auto-attacking. Not a huge deal. It does mean a bit fewer death strikes in addition to the amount of healing that they provide just being massively, poleaxed basically, so that's not great. Enfeeble reduces damage dealt to you by 12% instead of 15. That's the random proc that you get from your ghoul auto-attacking, not a huge deal. Null Magic is a new capstone talent. In fact, I will pull up the talent tree here, DK. It's this talent right here, Null Magic. It gives you flat magic damage reduction and then also magic debuff duration reduction. This is fine. DK is already head and shoulders above the other tanks in terms of dealing with magic damage, and so this doesn't mean anything. Bone Shield being 100% of your strength, increasing your armor by 100% of your strength instead of 80% is such a small change compared to the Death Strike change. The Death Strike change is like, it's cataclysmic by comparison. This definitely is not enough to compensate for any of these nerfs. This is like 500 more armor for DKs. Bleaching Strike was nerfed, nobody used it, so that's fine. Dancing Rune Weapon gets a 5% parry reduction and also 2 seconds off of the duration, and also about, 4% less runic power when you Heart Strike while DRW is up, so instead of 10 extra runic power, you get 6 extra runic power. So a little bit of a nerf, but not the end of the world. Blood Drinker has been nerfed. It's interesting that of these two talents here, they added in Blood Drinker and Consumption as these two, they've existed for a while, but 2 new options for Blood DK to use that are both pretty good, pretty strong. Consumption, I think, is the better of the two generically. It's certainly the better of the two in Mythic Plus, which is the higher scaling content since it scales infinitely. And that one's not getting touched, which is weird, but Blood Drinker is being nerfed slightly. And then Bone Storm is going to heal for less, which is fine, but also its damage is increased, so that's pretty cool. Ultimately, I'm not a huge fan of these changes for Blood DK. I think I made my point with the Death Strike nerf. I think that is really, 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 this is violence. They woke up and chose to kill Blood DKs. All right, let's move on to Vengeance. Demon Hunter, like Death Strike for Death Knights, Soul Fragments give Demon Hunters strong recovery against any type of damage, as well as strong self-healing. Because Demon Hunters consume Soul Fragments steadily, well, you know what? Death Knights are about to be Death Striking steadily. Okay, fine, whatever. Because Demon Hunters consume soul fragments steadily, we're not changing the rules for how often they can affect a damage event. We're increasing Vengeance's overall damage taken by weakening the damage reduction of talents like Void Reaver and Illuminated Sigils while keeping the power of core abilities like Soul Fragments and Demon Spikes. It will continue to be one of the stronger tank classes at self-healing and surviving magic damage. As it should be, right? This makes sense. Live by the Glaive will now restore 2% of your max health, just to show that one off in case you've forgotten. That is the new talent that they added in patch 10.2. It is this talent right here. You parry, you get some health and fury back, and it's a 5-second cooldown. Not a big deal. Thick Skin increases your stamina by 60 instead of 65. Fine. Demonic Wards gives you 8% flat DR instead of 10. Soul Cleave healing is down by 20. Soul Cleave healing really isn't that huge. 2% more damage taken is fine. Frailty healing you for 8% of damage dealt instead of 10. This right here. That's okay. You like Frailty. Frailty is great, but the reason you take Frailty really is for vulnerability and Void Reaver, the damage reduction and the damage output increase, which obviously, Void Reaver also nerfed. As kind of expected, it definitely will add up. You're going to have anywhere from 5 to 10 frailty stacks up. Well, 4 to 8 frailty stacks up on enemies most of the time. So, that's 4 to 8, 5% more damage taken from this, 2% more damage taken from that. Not really the end of the world, but definitely a bit of a nerf. Illuminated Sigils had already been nerfed pretty hard, and now it's going to go from 15% chance to parry attacks to 12%. That's pretty rough, but on the other hand, Down in Flames is also being nerfed. I would say just take Down in Flames and use that instead, but with Down in Flames also being nerfed, I think you could make a case for still using either of these in Mythic Plus. Obviously, Down in Flames is going to be the only option in Raid. And then Metamorphosis is just slightly less health. Dark Glare Boon does not give as much cooldown reduction on Fel Dev's cooldown, and does not refund as much Fury. So just generally speaking, cooldown uptime is going to be up less often. You know, I think something, and we'll get to this with Guardian Druid as well, but something that Vengeance Demon Hunters has said is, you know, we really haven't gotten any changes throughout the beta. That had been my notes in the in some of the roundups that I've been writing up. No changes to Vengeance Demon Hunter, no changes to Guardian Druid, and this is a real monkey's paw situation. Be careful what you wish for. You got changes now. How do you like them? Let's move on to Guardian Druid. With high armor and iron for uptime, Druids should be one of the best tanks at surviving physical damage. We're slightly increasing the damage they take from all types of damage, and balancing the power of their self-healing. We're also reducing the duration of some of their cooldowns to make their timing their use more important. Frenzied Regen will now heal you for 20% of your max health was 32%. This is a massacre. Now, I think technically speaking, this will heal for the same amount, the same value of healing as it did before because of the stamina increase, but that doesn't really matter. Values of damage are going up, and this definitely makes Frenzied Regen feel like a significantly weaker skill now, and rightly so. Like, I think that you're probably not going to be leaning on any of the talents that increase the value of Frenzied Regen. If we pull up the Druid talent tree here, just to show those off. Things like Reinvigoration, for example, I think that loses a ton of value. I think that really looks a lot less appealing. It was already not super great beforehand, but I think that's really lost a lot of value. Innate Resolve is still useful, but Reinvigoration as still a 2-pointer is like really just violently bad. Iron Fur is now only 112% of agility instead of 120. I don't really feel like this needed to be nerfed. This is kind of surprising that this is being brought down. You know, Bear Druids are good at surviving physical damage. It's the one thing they do that is interesting and useful, and that is kind of being very slightly nerfed. Not so much that I think you'd notice. Renewal's 20% of max health instead of 30. Still a good talent, still something you're going to want to take. Where is it? They moved it way up. Here it is. You know, it's a lot easier to get to. You're still going to use it. It just is less healing on demand. And then Reinvigoration has also been nerfed. Earth Warden has also been nerfed, this talent here that makes it so that your thrashes will reduce your damage taken from auto attacks. The fact that that was nerfed is kind of disappointing. I think that whole left side of the tree is looking really unappealing here, and we're not done. Survival of the Fittest reducing cooldowns by slightly less, and Tooth and Claw reducing damage taken by, what is it? 12% instead of 15%. I don't think that that's really gonna make much of a change. You know, you're not gonna not spec into Tooth and Claw now because you're taking 3% more damage while it's active. On the other hand, after the Wildfire has not seen an aura buff, it is the same heal value as it was before, even though everybody's got 60% more health. So that was sort of like a 60% nerf to it, but there was a fair amount of overhealing that would occur with it, so not really a 60% nerf, but then now they're making it proc 50% less often by increasing the amount of rage you need to spend by 50%, and I do think that kind of kills after the Wildfire. I probably won't be taking or using this going forward, especially with Survival of the Fittest also being nerfed. Yeah, I think I will probably be passing more through the middle of the tree and just sidestepping after the Wildfire and Survival of the Fittest entirely because they have really lost a lot of their value. And speaking of losing value, Ursoc's Fury is now a 25% of damage dealt shield with Thrash and Maul. Horrible. And Elun's Favored is a 25% healing conversion instead of 40%. This is a real big nerf for the Chosen of Elun hero talent tree, which is all about doing arcane damage and then having this talent to convert all of the tons of arcane damage that you deal. The spell damage tank Lunar Bear archetype is not dead on arrival, but it does make it so that the healing that was going to be providing for itself is not nearly as strong as it would have been, and that is actually pretty disappointing. I think that was the one thing I was really excited about and looking forward to with Bear in the coming expansion, and yeah, I'm not that thrilled about it now. Rage of the Sleeper has been a real success of a talent. I think all people who play Bear have really liked what they've done with it in Dragonflight, I should say, and so in the War Within, they are nerfing it pretty hard. Shorter duration, less damage reduction, less leech. You're still going to take it. It's still worth taking, but it is not as good as it was. Pulverize has been nerfed. Pulverize was already one of the worst talents in the game, something that you basically never ever take outside of very specific high-end progression rating situations where you have no alternative but to take this for the extra cooldown, and they have made it worse. It's incredibly unwieldy, it's incredibly low value, it's a terrible talent that they have nerfed for some reason. And finally, Ursoc's Guidance. The cooldown reduction for your Incarnation Guardian of Ursoc is slightly weaker than it was before, and that's about all that there is to that. It is 25% weaker than it was before, not really the end of the world. All right, now let's move on to Brewmaster Monks. Healers have more time to heal monks than other tanks because stagger spreads out the damage that they take over time. That's technically true. I wouldn't say that the amount of time that healers have to heal monks is substantially larger than other tanks. It's maybe the difference of 1.2 seconds instead of 1.0 seconds, but sure. Our goal is for monks to take a little more damage overall than other tanks to offset this effect. This is always the way that monk has worked, so, yeah. However, we feel that their overall magic damage mitigation is a little low compared to other tanks, and are improving it somewhat by buffing stagger and its value against magic. To increase their physical damage taken overall, we're primarily reducing the dodge granted by Elusive Brawler and some of their other talents. Okay, this is interesting because monks have gotten a couple of talents that I really, really like in this expansion, and I'm just going to path down to them to kind of show them off here. It's, tap. Okay, it's these two right here. One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn. Strike at Dawn makes it so that when you Rising Sun kick, you get a stack of your mastery, Elusive Brawler, the dodge mastery. And this is something I've wanted in the game since they first announced Rising Sun kick. It's something I've been like bargaining and dealing for since the Dragonflight beta. Make Rising Sun kick do something other than just straight damage. Make it do something defensive. This is something defensive, and it's a pretty good something defensive. The second talent here, One with the Wind, has some real issues with it, it makes it so that you have a 10% chance to not reset Elusive Brawler after you successfully dodge, and the issue with this is that sometimes when you're being attacked by a bunch of enemies that have their swing timers synced up, you will dodge one, and basically this will reset even though it shouldn't. That is essentially the issue. The problem with then nerfing this is these two talents that I was pretty excited about lose a lot of their value by nerfing dodge. Maybe you could go the other way here and say, well, no, now you need to lean even harder into getting more dodge to compensate for that missing dodge. But I don't think so. I think this really just kind of makes this one in particular, One with the Wind, really loses a lot of its appeal for me by cutting into dodge. All right, now let's take a look at the actual changes. Brewmaster's Balance increases Monk's armor by 50%, was 25%. That's actually pretty significant. That's more than the change to DKs, for example, at least proportionally more. This is okay. Elusive Brawler, chance to dodge reduced by 12%. That's a bit of a nerf, but at the same time, there have been some people in raid testing who've been getting well over 75% dodge chance on some of the bosses. Brewmaster Monk dodge chance was already really high because of Strike at Dawn and One with the Wind, and being able to couple that with mastery stacking, it definitely made it so that there was a potential chance for some real crazy dodge chances for monks. So I expected this to be nerfed. This isn't really surprising. Celestial Fortune heals you for 70% of the amount healed instead of 80. It's still really good. Basically, when you have Celestial Fortune proc, you're still going to get a bunch of extra healing. That's a good thing. 8% increase to staggered damage is really good. This is a really good change for Brewmaster Monk, and the percentage of magic stagger being increased from 45% to 58 is also really good. This is just a pair of really good buffs to Brewmaster Monk, which is kind of surprising considering the tone of all of these changes so far has been pretty substantial nerfs. These are two really big buffs. Dance of the Wind. Chance to dodge has been reduced to 5% for Brewmaster only. Now just a path down there. The talent Dance of the Wind, and also Yu'lon's Grace for that matter. Dance of the Wind is this talent right here. It's in a choice node with Dampen Harm, and I think, previously throughout most of the back half of Dragonflight, Dance of the Wind has been the better chance for Mythic Plus, only Mythic Plus, but 10% dodge chance, pretty good. 5% dodge chance, not pretty good. So, I think Dampen Harm is going to be the go-to, and I think that's really disappointing because it makes it so that where you had this choice node where you could kind of justify going either way in some situations, not really. No, you're just going to go with Dampen Harm all the time now. It just is kind of what it is. To a much bigger degree, Yu'lon's Grace has also got gotten nerfed. And I really liked Yulon's Grace. It was such a cool concept. 2% of your health every 2 seconds. Basically, 10 seconds, you'd get a shield for 10% of your health, and that would absorb magic damage only. Pretty good. Now that stacks up half as often, every 3 seconds instead of every 2, and it's only 1% of your max health every 3 seconds, so it is, 30 seconds to stack up to 10% of your max health. So that talent is completely dead, cooked, gone. You will never use this ever in any circumstances. It's diffuse magic all the way. And it's okay, right? It's okay for Monk, especially with them reducing the amount of cooldowns that Brewmaster has to handle. But it is definitely a pretty significant nerf. Healing Winds, a talent that no one would ever use. If I just Christmas tree here, please just let me down the tree. I beg you, Blizzard. Let me down. Okay. Healing Winds is this horrible talent. Transferring will heal you for a percentage of health. That doesn't matter. Staggering Strikes is this talent that no one ever takes, and they will continue to not take it because it has now been nerfed. Spirit of the Ox is the core passive to Brewmaster Monk that increases or gives you a chance to summon healing spheres when you take damage. It's not actually a chance, it's weird wording. Basically, when you've taken a full health bar pre-stagger worth of damage, you summon a healing sphere. That has been tweaked over the years, and now basically this boils down to 40% less healing for Brewmaster Monks. That's pretty significant. Healing spheres are pretty much the extent of the self-healing you have. The only other real options you have are like instant self-vivifies, which is really bad, and the core healing from Expel Harm, like the stuff that is buffed by Vigorous Expulsion and Strength of Spirit, but not like buffed by the healing spheres that you're consuming. So this is definitely a pretty substantial nerf to Brewmaster Monk's ability to self-heal. Elixir of Determination is a talent that I was super excited about coming into this expansion. It's this one right here. When you fall below 40% health, you gain an Absorb 4. It used to be 50% of your recently purified damage, which is just your last purify, or a minimum of 20% of your max health on a 15-second cooldown. That was pretty crazy. I think capping it at 8% is maybe the better move. And then 30% of your recently purified damage, if you get a big stagger, which is going to happen a lot more often now that you are staggering much larger hits. Or I should say you're staggering a much larger percentage of damage because of just this baseline stagger and magic stagger increases. I think that's probably for the best. I think you'll probably be hitting that 30% of your recently purified sort of floor more often than just 8% of your max health, but still 8% max health shield is not good. It's not a lot. But given that this is such a short cooldown, 15 seconds, and you're going to be purifying a lot more, I think that this actually winds up not being quite as bad as it looks at first glance. And then Celestial Brew healing reduced by 10%. Totally expected. Actually fine. There's a lot of points where Celestial Brew is a very, very big shield, and it's not that you necessarily aren't consuming the whole thing. I think about like a Mythic Farrak or pushing Mythic Plus, or a lot of the Mythic Plus or Mythic Raid testing. You're definitely consuming the whole Celestial Brew, but just by having it active at all, you're preventing getting like one shot, and then that gives you more room to self-heal. Not that you're going to be doing as much of that going forward, but also gives your healers some room to heal. So I think it's okay. And then Pretense of Instability. This talent right here is now 10% dodge after you Purifying Brew or Celestial Brew instead of 15. So that is like on average, probably considering that you're most likely just going to drop Dance of the Wind entirely. That was 10% more flat dodge. And the Pretense of Instability is something you try to maintain as much as you can. So that was like 25% dodge between these two talents, Dance of the Wind and Pretense of Instability, and now you're going down to just 10. That's a pretty substantial increase in the amount of attacks that you're not going to be dodging. Definitely does some to like alleviate diminishing returns on mastery, but at the same time, they're also nerfing the mastery. So, Brewmaster Monk is definitely going to be taking a lot more auto attack damage. I don't think that's great for them in Mythic Plus, but I think that these changes are generally very good for them in raids. All right, Protection Paladins have a balance of good defenses against both physical and magic damage. Yes, they do. They can be in danger if they lose the defensive power of Standing in Consecration, or if the armor bonus from Shield of the Righteous drops. So we're not reducing any of their passive physical defenses like armor or block. Okay, like Druids, Paladins have high uptime on their defensive cooldowns, so we're pulling back some of their durations to make timing their use more important. We would like Paladins to have slightly more self-healing, so we're increasing the power of Word of Glory. Okay, Shield of the Righteous increases your armor by 150% of your strength instead of 170%. This doesn't matter. This is a nothing change. That's fine. The damage reduction effect while standing in Consecrate of Mastery Divine Bulwark is reduced by 20%. I don't think this is enough to make Mastery an unappealing stat for Paladins. Maybe you will go for versatility above Mastery. Maybe, but I think this is still a fine stat. Sanctified Plate's armor increase no longer applies to bonus armor from Shield of the Righteous. Yeah, okay, fine. That's probably for the best. Sanctified Plates, if I remember correctly, is this talent right here. Yep, right in the middle. 10% more armor, 10% increased armor, so that no longer applies to Shield of the Righteous. Okay, fine, fair enough. Kind of surprised that it ever did in the first place. And then improves Holy Shield, increasing your chance to block spells by 8%. I think that's something that's kind of niche anyway, so not really that big of a deal. The buff from Of Dusk and Dawn reduces your damage taken by 4% instead of 5%. Okay, wow, 1% more damage taken, that's, who cares? 10% Word of Glory healing while doing nothing about the mana cost is very funny. You're still going to be completely limited by the mana cost. 10% Word of Glory healing, also playing around with it on the beta. It really doesn't heal for very much, so 10% of nothing is nothing. I don't really think that this winds up moving the needle at all. Prot Pallies, much like Prot Warriors, are definitely still going to be very tanky little balls of cooldowns that are reliant on healers to really keep their health going. Sentinel is reduced to 16 seconds. That is Sentinel right here. It's very weird that it'll only last for 16 seconds, whereas regular Avenging Wrath will last for 20. You do obviously get some of the duration extension through Zealot's Paragon, casting Hammer of Wrath and Judgment to extend that duration. I am surprised they didn't just put a cap on it through this. That would be the thing in my mind. Cap the extension, the duration extension from Zealot's Paragon instead of nerfing the base duration uptime. But yeah, that's 20% less duration, which means 20% less time to get more of those extensions through Zealot's Paragon. That's actually pretty significant. And then Eye of Tyr is reduced from 9 seconds to 6. That is also quite a substantial reduction in the duration, but I think most of the time you're using Eye of Tyr either at the start of pulls to really grab threat in AoE and also give yourself just a few seconds of breathing room, in which case I don't really think this matters all that much, or you're using it to mitigate big incoming burst damage events from raid bosses, and those usually aren't at 9 seconds long. They're usually 3 to 5 seconds long, or one instant hit. So I think that this is okay in the end. I don't think this is actually going to wind up having that substantial of an impact. And then Righteous Protector Holy Power abilities reduce cooldowns by 1.5 seconds was 2. This has been coming a long time. This used to be 3 seconds, then it was 2, now it's 1.5, it'll be 1, and then, eventually at some point it's just going to be gone. They've been kind of biting Warrior style for a long time with the cooldown reduction. Obviously, Paladins have also had Avenging Wrath cooldown reduction for ages and ages, but they've definitely been taking some of the best parts of Warrior and copying them on what is, I think, ultimately a much stronger class. And it unsurprisingly has made Paladin stronger. So I think that this reins them back in a way that definitely it'll be noticeable. You're going to have a lot less cooldown uptime. Frankly, it'll just kind of be more boring. That is really the biggest takeaway I have from this. I don't think that Paladin's going to be bad. I think it's just going to be a little bit more dull. And now we'll conclude with Warrior. Warriors are the strongest tank against physical damage, though they can be vulnerable to magic and periodic damage. Oh, you could say that again. In this round of changes, we're increasing their damage taken across the board by reducing the power of defensive stance. Warriors also have some strong heals that scale with their maximum health, like Indomitable and Impending Victory, so we're reducing the power of these abilities to compensate for the 60% increase to stamina. Pain and Gain, Impending Victory, these have both been nerfed, that's fine. Defensive Stance reduces damage taken by 16%, was 20%, so they've taken away the damage penalty for Defensive Stance in the coming expansion. You basically will camp in Defensive Stance all the time while tanking as a warrior, and so, this is still a pretty substantial bonus compared to how warriors have been in the back half of Dragonflight. So I don't really think that 4% more damage taken by warriors does a ton to nerf them. Also, this new talent here, Fight Through the Flames, on the left-hand side gives you a bit of extra magic damage reduction when you're in defensive stance. No one's going to take this. No one was going to take it at 5%. No one's going to take it at 6%. It really would need to do something more like reducing the cooldown of Spell Reflection or Shield Spell Block, or like a double-digit amount of magic damage reduction for it to be any good. But it isn't any of those things, so it's not. Into the Fray, the talent over on the left-hand side, if I just Christmas tree my way down, this talent right here in a choice node gives you up to 10% haste previously. Now it's up to 8% haste. This does mean that it's a little easier to get to full power. You only have to be near 4 combined enemies and allies as opposed to 5. It is definitely a nerf to warrior, 2% less haste basically, but that's okay because what you can do instead is just stick with heavy repercussions. That's probably what you would do early on in the expansion anyway, to guarantee 100% shield block uptime. So not the end of the world, that change. Punish reduces the damage that enemies deal to you. Punish is one of these 2 choice nodes over here. You're definitely not going to be taking Juggernaut. I still think you're going to be taking Punish, 10% more shield slam damage, still a stacking damage reduction bonus. And Enduring Alacrity, this talent over here, gives you more stamina and armor and haste, and it's still the same amount of haste, so I still think it's pretty good. Also, Indomitable, this talent, which gave you 10% health and would heal you for a lot, has been cut to 6% more health, which I guess that's proportional to the stamina bonus, so that whatever. But more importantly, the amount of healing that it provides has been cut in half. The problem is that there aren't other good talents down here that are like clamoring to take its place, so this is just a reduction in the steady self-healing trickle that warriors have. It's not a talent that you're not going to take now. Now, there are a couple of other pretty interesting changes here, and one of those would be Defender's Aegis, which has gone from being 30 seconds off the cooldown of Shield Wall and also an extra charge to 60 seconds off the cooldown, so 2.5 minute recharge. You know, you can combine this with Anger Management, which is right here in the middle, and give yourself a lot more cooldown reduction on Shield Wall and have pretty good uptime on Shield Wall. I do think this makes Defender's Aegis more competitive with Impenetrable Wall, but Impenetrable Wall has also been buffed. It now makes it so that Shield Slam generates 4 extra rage instead of 3, and also reduces the cooldown of Shield Wall by 6 seconds instead of 5. So, you know, I think they did this good thing of making Defender's Aegis a more competitive talent, making this just a more competitive choice node, and then they also buffed the other option by a lot, by basically the same amount, except also it gives you more rage to fuel Anger Management. And so I think it is just still going to be the exact same situation where you take Impenetrable Wall 100% of the time. And then the only other change to warriors is the Disrupting Shout, which is an AoE interrupt, and what was it, a 75-second cooldown before? Now it's a 90-second cooldown. Okay, so that is the extent of the changes. You know, in terms of the way that I feel about it, I think looking through all of the changes, looking through all of the classes, I feel not great about this. And I think really if I had to pick a reason why I feel not great about it, it is the timing. If I can even go back to the first page here, the first post, the feedback, please. Now, you know, this is not a thing that tanks would have been happy about to learn that this was their plan 2 months ago. People would be mad. But if we'd had 2 months to test Mythic Plus, have tuning on the Mythic Plus testing, test Delves, test Heroic and Mythic Raids with it, and give feedback based on all that testing and get things in order, get things right for the start of the expansion, I think people would be pretty happy about it. But they're dropping this after all of the testing is concluded. We're a week out from the pre-patch. We're like a month and a week away from the expansion launch. And they're dropping this now, after the testing is done. This is the stance that people are taking, and I can't disagree with them. It's pretty frustrating for this to drop now and have your feedback be kind of the big capstone that they're concluding all of this with. Like, we would love feedback. For what purpose? And I think the purpose is obviously to, you know, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. They want the game to be in the best state. I think everybody wants that. But obviously doing this with no window to make those changes except during the season is pretty troubling. Now, in terms of classes, I think Monk is probably the biggest winner of the set of nerfs here. You know, the problem I have with them is that they are basically being reverted back to the way they were in Legion and BFA, where they were very tanky, but they just had absolutely no self-healing at all. They were completely reliant on healers to carry them. This is a design that worked, but players really ranted and railed about for like 5 years until it was finally changed, and we ended up where we are throughout Dragonflight and most of the War Within beta. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. And now it's, I mean, this right here. Now it's back to how it was. Thanks, Blizzard, I hate it. I also think Warriors are pretty big winners through these changes, by which I really just mean that they are small losers. There is a larger and more annoying change here happening than what Blizzard did at the start of Dragonflight, where they just nerfed the damage reduction for all the tanks except Warrior. But the end result, I think, is still kind of the same. Being able to mitigate tons of damage is just a lot more important, defensive stance right here. Being able to mitigate a lot more damage than other tanks becomes way more important than having self-sustain as a tank, because no one has self-sustain as a tank anymore. Frenzy Regen, Gutted, Blood Decay, Death Strike, Annihilated. Vengeance Demon Hunter and Paladin come through, I think, in pretty good shape. I think that Vengeance Demon Hunter is also another, small loser of this set of changes. They did get a bunch of teeny tiny little ticky-tack nerfs here, ticky-tack nerf there, but nothing that really adds up into a massive set of reductions for them, unlike with some other classes. And I think Pallies are in the same boat. The real changes here are just that they have cooldown reduction availability going down, and, it probably was too high throughout all of Dragonflight. If we're being honest with ourselves, Pallies probably have had too high of uptime. They've had it too good, and you know what? They're still gonna have it pretty good. They're still in pretty good shape. Druids, I think, if I had to pick a biggest loser here, it really is hard to choose between Blood Decay and Druid, because Blood Decay on the one hand kind of loses, I think, a lot of the artful nature of the class, but on the other hand, they are more than just Death Strike. They really do have a lot of positive things going for them. They have a ton of cooldowns, they have a lot of upside, they have a mandatory group utility in the form of Grips and A-Bomb Limb, and, a lot of useful stuff like Anti-Magic Shell, and they're really just a very strong class, even with Death Strike being made into a very boring and terrible design. And I think if there were one thing that I was going to point to and say, no, you know what, that might actually get nerfed, I do think it probably is this. Bear Druids, on the other hand, they're losing self-healing, they're losing group healing from after the wildfire, they're losing self-shielding from Ursoc's Fury, they're losing self-sustain from Elun's Favored, they're losing cooldown uptime and value, they're losing cooldown uptime, they're losing so much. Talents that are being nerfed that you would go like, all right, well, I guess I just won't go take after the wildfire or survival of the fittest, I'll take Earth Warden and Reinvigoration instead. No, you won't. That is pretty rough. I think, again, Monkey's Paw really kind of nails it down. Druids have been begging for some kind of changes for months now and have gotten absolutely nothing. And now here it is. These are your changes, Druids. I hope you like them. All right, I want to conclude with something nice. Might be a little bit challenging. I did think tanks were feeling pretty overpowered through a lot of the testing. So I think that there was a lot of fat that could be cut away and still keep tanks at a pretty strong state. This has certainly been true for a lot of people doing high-level Mythic Plus testing, where all the people in the group will get annihilated by every mechanic, but the tank will be at full health the whole time. So, now the tank is going to be not at full health the whole time, necessarily. You never know. If they use your cooldowns correctly, you might still be pretty good. Maybe this makes it so that some of the tank trinkets that they're trying to push onto tanks, maybe they'll have more value as well by limiting some of tank's power. Boy, that is an awful thing to have to think. I was trying to end on a positive note. Okay, I don't really expect changes here, at least not before the beta. Maybe the feedback will be heard that loud and clear, but I don't think so. Before the beta ends, I mean. I think that we will probably get changes partway through the first season to compensate for this. But the feedback has definitely been pretty strong and pretty negative so far, so, it is within the realm of possibility. I think the biggest silver lining here is that this is a justifiable excuse to complain about another terrible decision Blizzard has made regarding tanks. And if there's one thing I know about tanks from being a tank myself, it's fun to complain. Ultimately, I come back to the same thing that I kind of always try to keep in my mind whenever there are nerfs like this, which is, it is a game, you can play it, and, if you're not enjoying yourself on a given tank, maybe take a break from that tank, try something else for a while. I have to say, you know, even with all of these changes happening, I don't really think it changes the playstyle for tanks in a way that I hate. Like, I don't think that they're going to feel unfun because of this. I think they're just going to feel weak. And I think I'm still going to wind up having a fun time playing the game. You know, I do like overcoming a challenge. I like Dark Souls, so I think I'm going to have a fun time overcoming these challenges and kind of trying to figure out what has changed for tanks. Some of these things like Dance of the Wind being nerfed or maybe a little more obvious than others, but I'm certain that there will be ways to get around these changes, kind of figure out how to make things work in the aftermath of this set of tank nerfs. All right, I think that covers it. I have gone on for more than long enough. Thanks for watching. Bye.